Welcome to Musings on Mysteries and the Mythical Matrix. Ladies and gentlemen, mystery seekers, musers, conspiracy theorists, interdimensional philosophers, seekers of truth, and last but certainly not least, all of you that desperately cling to your confirmation bias. Whether your interest is Atlantis, Zeus, or anything in between, we tackle it all from our quantumly entangled castle tucked away in the ancient flood-battered Central Pangean mountain range. We're a podcast dedicated to exploring the ancient, mysterious, and unknown with logic and reason, and where we also theorize the fourth dimension exists as the spiritual. Only trigger warning for this episode is a logical conversation, so if applying the Socratic method on fringe topics is disturbing to you, you'll want to turn off the podcast. So, that being said, I am joined by my wife, Madison.
Hello, hello.
And you have a psychology fact for us, right?
Yes.
Sweet. Let's hear it.
So, doing things that scare you can actually make you happier.
Can you explain that?
So if you are doing something that scares you, it releases adrenaline and endorphins. And I forget what part of the brain, but do you remember the part of the brain that you can train it to do certain things when you're scared or don't want to do something?
No.
No?
No.
All right.
Sorry.
Maybe we'll look that up. I don't know. But yeah, that's my fact.
Brain anatomy was one of the classes I missed out on, unfortunately, for psychology. So,
oh, you heathen.
Yeah, I tried, I think, and then I couldn't get in for some reason. I think the class was full.
Oh.
But yeah, no, that makes sense. I mean, doing something that's hard gives you, adrenaline and all of that, and then gives you a greater appreciation for when things are a little bit easier. So
yeah.
It makes sense.
I mean, relating it to the ice plunge that we do.
Yes.
Yeah, that would be a good example of training your brain to do something that you don't like.
Yeah, we got to do that after this here, so fun times.
Yeah.
Ice plunge at like 10 o'clock at night. Gotta love it.
Yeah.
So, all right, first things first, we are going to do some follow-ups before diving into the Tale of Atrahasis. So, this will all be from the last episode, some things I want to clarify, some things I was slightly wrong on. Got to fact check yourself, So this will be kind of if you've listened to the Enuma Elish episode, this will be kind of a continuation of that in the first segment here. And then hopefully by the time we hit the first break, we're moved on into the actual Tale of Atrahasis. That's the plan anyway. So we'll see how it actually goes.
I did not know there was fact checking in this. So
yeah, I haven't.
This is the first time hearing of it.
Yeah, I was like listening and digging more into stuff, and I'm like, oh yeah, I got these things slightly wrong. I need to come back and address this. So,
whoops.
It's all right.
It happens.
It's part of the process, Sometimes small mistakes are made learning. Nothing like super major, but we'll dive right into it here. So if you're just here for the Tale of Atrahasis, I'd skip ahead to maybe like the 10, 12, 15-minute mark. For those of our listeners that were listening to the Enuma Elish episode and you want to hear more, then stick around. So first things first, I believe I said that clay was used to form humanity from the Enuma Elish, but that's actually not from the Enuma Elish. I got that detail mixed up from the Atrahasis epic, which we're about to dive into. The Enuma Elish doesn't specifically say clay. It just says that Ea forms humanity at Marduk's command. So just wanted to clarify that because that's an important tie-in for this epic, and I got those details mixed up from the Atrahasis to the Enuma Elish. So it's a reasonable mistake. They're both kind of inferred in a sense. Like you can kind of infer one from the other and fill in the details of one story with another story. But the Enuma Elish doesn't specifically say that. So not like a blatant huge mistake because it is from mythology in the region, but...
So like it could be inferred.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But that'll all tie in here. Next thing was... Tiamat. This is one other thing I wanted to mention, especially because in my video, I did a depiction of Tiamat having serpentine qualities. So that's something you'll see with the Enuma Elish a lot, is that people will depict Tiamat as a serpent, the goddess of water. But it doesn't explicitly ever state that she has the appearance of a serpent. That's just kind of an embellishment from afterwards that I meant to clarify that last episode, but I didn't get around to that.
Are they referring to like personality, like snake type, or?
No, it's more just like kind of how you have like St. George and the dragon, and the hero always fights the dragon. That a lot of people, when they're telling us stories, will depict Tiamat as a serpent, and so it's like a creative liberty that's not specifically stated.
Oh, gotcha.
So I just wanted to clarify that, for more of our deep dive section, to be like, hey, this isn't actually how she's described. It's just a creative depiction that myself and a lot of other people do tend to use. I also forgot to say, like with the Enuma Elish, actually like where the name comes from, I think in the introduction. So the Enuma Elish literally means when on high and is the first phrase of the epic. And so that's why it's called that. It's also referred to as the 7 tablets of creation, which we did reference in the last episode.
Right.
Next one was, because of a tentative guest upcoming, I did a little bit of digging into that CIA article we were talking about. Apparently that was not a new release. That was an older release that people were just starting to post about again as if it was new. So I know I just said I'd seen people posting about that, but I wanted to clarify. I couldn't find anything recent about that astral projection to Mars thing.
So are they just reposting it now and rehashing it now just because of all the other theories and stuff coming up?
I mean, maybe.
But that's becoming more popular again.
The way that people were phrasing it, it was like new posts and videos, like that the CIA had just released this, but the CIA had actually released this, I think, like 5-10 years ago or something like that. So sorry, whoops, that's what I get for just seeing people post on social media and being like, hey, let's talk about this. But I think
moral of the story, take everything with a grain of salt.
I mean, I feel like it fit with the conversation we were having with like, tying in, potential Tiamat planet, getting water on Mars, and, all that whole connection.
Yeah, either way, it did connect.
So not a big deal. I mean, I didn't say it was a recent study. I did clarify when we were talking about it that, hey, other people are saying about this. I haven't looked into it, but I'm going to chime my 2 cents in. So my opinion changes when the facts change. So no big deal. Clarification as well that I owe to the listeners. I had stated both in the Nibiru video and with, I think, my theory on Nibiru on the podcast as well, that Enlil is connected to Saturn, the planet Saturn, when I was reading from the Sumerian mythology book. So there's a slight leap there. That's not strict Mesopotamian mythology that idea comes from. That's comparative mythology with Greek mythology, because Kronos is a god in the Greek pantheon that is associated with Enlil and a lot of his traits, and he is the god of Saturn, Kronos. So Enlil is actually more depicted with Jupiter, but that doesn't quite fit so well when we read the Enuma Elish, because Marduk is more correlated to Jupiter, from that time period of Babylon. So Enlil still could also be referenced as Jupiter in this instance, but my thought is it fits just as well for him to be Saturn. Either way, whether you want to correlate him to Jupiter or Saturn, Enlil would be the head of the outer planets regardless. So the theory still holds, but just an important clarification. I wanted to kind of denote that a little bit because I realized I didn't quite explain that jump. So, all right. The Babylonian map of the world, I did some more digging into this one. Dr. Heiser has some good information on it. So the Sitchin seal, it can represent a planet. There's a similar symbol that also, like the star that Sitchin references being this
planet, a singular planet.
Yeah, that reference, like the seal that Sitchin has, like the star depicted on that he thinks is the sun. There is a similar image that's used to depict Venus, and I think maybe another planet as well. So I did want to bring that up, that is kind of a common themology, so that my map theory might not hold as much water as I initially thought. But there's still absolutely no precedent for there being a sun depicted that way. So Sitchin is making quite a leap there. There's no precedent in Mesopotamian mythology. So my theory of the map, while not maybe the traditional way to interpret it, and it might be wrong, it would still be more of a sound way to interpret it than Sitchin's idea of that being a map of our literal solar system, because I'm still basing it off of Mesopotamian symbology, even though it might be a little bit more of a leap to get there than like the more traditional way to look at it. Right. So I just want to bring that to the attention of listeners that, hey, I have some harebrained theories every once in a while that, I don't think it's an outrageous theory, but, it doesn't, looking more into Mesopotamian symbology, it doesn't hold quite as much water as I had initially thought it did. So let's see. There was also an interesting image I saw where someone took a picture of Saturn and a whole bunch of the stars around Saturn as seen from Earth, like the Pleiades constellation and all of that. And it lined up like perfectly with the cylinder seal VA243 that Sitchin references. So that's another theory, because you can see all of that with the naked eyes, that cylinder seal just has a depiction of Saturn on it with a whole bunch of stars that of the constellation, near Saturn.
And
so
are you saying that they match up, or
they matched up perfectly?
Okay.
Like someone like Saturn would be the star with like the 6 or 7 points or whatever on the cylinder seal VA243, and then all the other dots would be the stars surrounding it, like a ways away, of course, but it would appear to us like they're right next to it in like the Pleiades constellation and the Orion belt, because they all like kind of line up at a certain time of year, I think. So someone also suggested that, and it like lined up perfectly. So I think, like I said I think I said this in the last episode, but like the sky is vast. Like there's no precedent for it being a sun. If it's a planet or even a star, it could be any number of things. There's no reason to point to this cylinder seal and be like, oh, look, they had knowledge of an extra planet in the solar system. There's no precedent for that. There could be any number of other things. It could be Saturn and the stars around it. It could be the map that I've suggested. It could be a depiction of Venus. Like there could be any number of things that play into it.
I mean, the lining up with all the stars, that kind of reminds me of the pyramids lining up too.
Yeah, well, they also do line up to the Orion belt.
Yeah.
At, I think, a certain time of year anyway. So again, there's so many different ways to look at it and think about it. To be so, I mean, again, I don't want to disrespect someone blatantly, but to be so narrow-minded as to say that like, oh, it's the solar system and they had a knowledge of an extra planet when there's so many other things in the sky it could be, if it even is the sky, as opposed to like a map.
Yeah.
That there's just so many possibilities. Like, how can you absolutely say something like that based off of a very loose reading of the texts about Nibiru? Like,
not until we get a lot more information about it.
Yeah, and see, that's the thing.
Can
like,
we say like a definitive answer?
Yeah, and I won't say a definitive answer on a lot of things about all this mythology, because there's so much we don't know. We just don't have enough information. Like, as Tony Stark says in the Avengers, you can't do the equation without all the variables. It's in the first Avengers movie. But you truly can't. Like, you have to have all of your inputs right to be able to produce an accurate output. And so we can speculate, I can get behind my map theory or the Saturn idea or even the Venus idea. Like, all of these are possible. I meant my map thing more as just, hey, I'm speculating. This makes more sense to me. This is probably what it is in my mind with the information I had at the time. And then, as I did more digging, hey, there's more facts. So maybe it's one of these other things. So I just want to come back and clarify that, because to logically speculate on life, I'm not going to get everything right, and I'm not going to claim something is absolutely true that is that abstract, but it's still a solid theory in my mind. It still could be a little bit of a stretch, but could be. I was listing off all the Noah figures in the last episode, and I said the Tale of Atrahasis, but Atrahasis is one of the Noah figures, and I didn't list him as that. So, yeah, whoops. Whoops. Anyway, it happens. Yeah, so I might have mixed him up with Ziazudra and the Eridu Genesis, not sure. But if I did, sorry, clarify that here. Atrahasis is from the Tale of Atrahasis, and Ziazudra is from the Eridu Genesis. The Eridu Genesis will be the next one that we do on the show at some point here. I'll explain all that probably at the end.
Still don't understand how you know all these names, like off the top of your head.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess I'm a nerd for mythology.
You guess?
Rude. That's so uncalled for. Okay. I'll take it, actually. So I will actually go through and explain why there's so many different names for a Noah figure in the Mesopotamian region, but I'll touch on that later on in the episode because it ties into one we're talking about with Atrahasis. So let's see. Yeah. Overall, I do my best I can with my research. My primary area of love and interest in mythology is with the Atlantis stuff. Mesopotamian, I'm familiar with a lot of things. I'm not a complete mastered expert on everything, but I do have a good understanding of it, as I think you're noticing with me being able to correlate all these names. And I'm also attention to detail, so if I get things wrong, I'm coming back. I'm trying to make it right. But
we don't want to sway or lead anybody.
Yes.
purposefully in the wrong direction.
Right. I've read a lot of these tales. I've not read everything yet from Sumerian mythology that we are yet going to dive into. I've read the Tale of Atrahasis, of course. Everything else that we've dug into, I've read through it and listened to it on audiobook or something, multiple times just to make sure it's all synergized in my mind. So I don't come on here and talk about stuff I haven't read about or at least listened on the audiobook in terms of this in-depth of a dive to a mythology topic.
Yep.
So just wanted to clarify that. That being said, also going to throw a plug in here as well before we move into the actual show material. I did just start up an Amazon affiliate link for the podcast. So all of the books that we reference and cite, I've gone back through all of the podcasts and I've put our Amazon affiliate link that if you click that and you buy the book after clicking that link, we get a small portion of the proceeds from your purchase. And the way Amazon does it, I don't think there's any extra cost to the listeners as well. I think it's just still the same cost. It's just, hey, we refer you to that, so we get a little bit of the cut and, a little bit less goes to Amazon basically. So if you are interested to read any of these tales, I'm putting sources that I at least reference or whatever in the show notes. Click our link, please, if you're interested to buy these and get them on Amazon, if you would be so kind. If that's what you're interested to, if you're interested to read these, go through that process, because then it helps support us. And it also shows too that hey, we're actually boosting sales for this material and everything as well. So yeah, I'm trying to think. That definitely be a big help. And see how we're doing on time here. Yeah, about 17 minutes. So I kind of guessed that pretty close. So we'll take a quick ad break here and we will come back with the actual meat and potatoes of the show. Did you know that ancient myths and even the Bible describe a divine council, a celestial assembly where major decisions are made? Today we're diving into one of the oldest stories of divine rebellion, human creation, and the cosmic flood, the Atrahasis epic. Along the way, we'll compare it to themes of the Enuma Elish, the Bible, and more.
Woo!
We are back to discuss the Tale of Atrahasis. Some of the major themes to keep in mind is going to be, so this will kind of be like your table of contents here. There's a rebellion of the Igigi, which I will explain what those are. There's the actual creation of humanity, Divine Counsel from Mesopotamian mythology and the Bible. We'll talk about both of those. And then there's the actual flood, and then there's kind of the conclusion. I will also say, I did a short video on YouTube. I didn't think I'd be able to get it done in the time I did, but I just kind of locked in for a day and knocked out the Tale of Atrahasis, so it's on the YouTube channel. This one should be a little easier to digest. From all of the Mesopotamian myths I've read, this one was by far the easiest and most engaging to read. And it's a pretty straightforward story. So if you should be able to follow along with this as a listener, a lot easier compared to the Enuma Elish from last week's episode. But if you want that extra visual aid, I did put together a video with a lot of enhanced visuals in comparison to everything else. So let's jump into a little bit of context here for the Tale of Atrahasis. It's a Babylonian epic from the Old Babylonian period around the 17th century approximately. There's both Babylonian and Assyrian versions of this that exist. In my opinion, as I've already said, it's one of the more engaging and intriguing mythology accounts from Mesopotamian myth. It highlights different themes of labor, rebellion, cosmic balance, and then you can see that there's some influence that this kind of has into things like the Epic of Gilgamesh with the figure of Atrahasis as this lays the groundwork. So we're going to do this one a little bit differently. We're going to talk about I'm going to talk about the Anunnaki and the Igigi first, and then we're going to, instead of telling a story and then comparative mythology, we're going to tell the story and do comparative analysis as we go. So that should work a little bit better for you, as we're going through, you don't have to write down your thoughts this time. You can just say them.
Oh, you mean you as in me, not you as in the listener.
No, yeah, like literally you, like my wife sitting next to me. So
I am your wife. Yes,
you are. We got married. I was there.
Same.
Yeah, imagine that. All right, so anyway, here, let's get back on track. So the Anunnaki, you hear a lot of talk about the Anunnaki from people like Zechariah Sitchin. I'm going to say the name, Billy Carson, all of these people that want to promote the ancient alien astronaut theories, that the Anunnaki came from Nibiru. Well, we've already debunked the Nibiru idea, but let's talk about the Anunnaki here. What are the Anunnaki actually in mythology? They are high-ranking gods. They're responsible for governing the cosmos and decreeing fate. They're like the ruling council in Mesopotamian mythology. This may be referring to something similar of the biblical Divine Council, as we'll be talking about. So I thought that was a good topic to tie in here. The word Anunnaki has a number of different meanings and understandings. So you could go a number of ways with this. One way to look at it is that Anunnaki just means the sons of Anu, the sky god. There's also in the Mesopotamian region, I think of like Iraq or something in that region anyway, that the word Anu and Naki combined together means ancestors. So the implication here is ancestors specifically of divine or princely descent. So there's a number of different ways you can look at the word Anunnaki, but there's nothing really in the word itself that would indicate definitively that they're actually ancient alien astronauts. Thoughts on that?
No.
Okay. So
my mind is all over the place right now. So.
No, it's all right. So good question to ask here is how does this, like the idea of a sky god or gods in the sky coming down, sons of God, or sons of Anu in this case is referred to in Mesopotamian mythology, coming down to earth as we see outlined in Genesis 6, where the sons of God come down and take, from the daughters of men as they please, and then the Nephilim come into existence. Mm-hmm. So you do see some similar ideas and concepts here interwoven where there is a coming down in a sense that's kind of implied by the name of sons of Anu. But, whether they're coming down from... As it's put in Indiana Jones, The Crystal Skull, I'm quoting a lot of movies tonight. That's just where my mind is. When the alien spaceship takes off, Indy asks, where do they go? Into space. And then Ox says back, not into space, but the space between spaces. Oh,
I love that line.
Yeah. So it becomes a question of, okay, so they're coming down from heaven. Is this actually talking about space aliens? Is this more of a inference like how we have with Greeks where they were on Mount Olympus and they're coming down from the sky up in the mountains because that's just where they made their abode? Or is it talking about a spiritual coming down of some kind of entities or something?
Or like interdimensional being?
Yeah, that would be like the spiritual aspect because fourth dimension,
yeah,
as we talk about on the show.
Yes.
So is it some kind of fourth dimensional spiritual being that's coming down? And then, that's what's being referred to here as, the sons of Anu. I don't know. These are all questions we've got to ask and entertain. There's no explicit understanding of some kind of technology or anything like that being stated right off the bat here in the name Anunnaki. But there's room to talk about it and to theorize and to speculate. So the Anunnaki have specific domains of rule and control different aspects of reality. So tying it back to the Enuma Elish, as we talked about, all those gods that get assigned roles, well, maybe not all of them, but at least like the key gods would be the Anunnaki. So Enlil would be one. He's kind of also a storm deity. So he's kind of in charge of like winds and storms and all of that. Then again, you have Enki or Ea, who's, the kind of more friendly, benevolent Anunnaki god. He's the god of wisdom and water. And then you have the goddess Nintu, who is like the mother goddess, the goddess of like creation in a sense. And you have all of these different main gods that are given different domains to control. You would see Enki has a lot of control over water, as he's kind of the one that is initially prodded to bring on the flood, as we'll see later on. But the Anunnaki basically are just beings that have control over some aspect of the cosmos and or reality, some kind of governance over it, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. So then that adds a whole new dimension to thinking about this ancient alien astronaut kind of thing. In reality, it almost more sounds like superheroes to me than anything. But again, maybe this is even referring to more of an impersonal force than anything else. You know, that these impersonal forces are what's actually causing things, and it's just a way to like how do you quantify gravity? Well, maybe you just put a name to it. You know, I don't know, give it a personality. It's a way to think about it, and we have to ask all of these different questions and think all of these different angles as we're looking into the mythology. So who are the Igigi? As they will be very important to the upcoming discussion here. They're younger gods, they're laboring gods, they do work for the Anunnaki. A good way to think about it would be like, this isn't a specific example, but this is just a way to try to relate it to the listeners. The Igigi have like subsections of what the Anunnaki have. So if you have Ea or Enki, because he goes by both names, controls water and wisdom, both in a broad sense. One of the Igigi might be like in control of like tides or something like that. Another one might be in control of like tsunamis. This is just a way to kind of quantify it, where they're like a subcategory of lower gods that have a very small amount of control in comparison to the Anunnaki. So it's just important to keep these two classes of god in mind, because when we're reading talking about the Tale of Atrahasis, these two are just kind of mentioned right off the bat, and there's not a lot of explanation and in-depth dive into what all of these are. So just want to clarify all of that. But yeah, the Divine Council of the Anunnaki is led by Enlil, and I'm trying to see here. They end up deliberating. Well, I'll save that for when we actually start talking about it. But yeah, so here's an interesting comparative analysis point that I want to hit. Connecting the Anunnaki and the Igigi to the idea of a divine council that's mentioned in Psalm 82:1. It says that God has taken his place in the divine council. In the midst of the gods, he holds judgment. So this is an interesting verse here, because with Psalms, you have to understand there's a poetic nature to it. And so, it might not be being literal here. But this phraseology indicates that there is some kind of council of gods, of, other gods that exist, that the Almighty God from the biblical perspective is holding judgment with, that he is the head of this council. Now, whether you want to define this as like the Trinity, or whether you want to define this as a bunch of like really high-class angels or something that report to him, that control these different aspects of reality. But this adds a new dimension to start thinking about a divine council, and Christianity even, by looking at the Mesopotamian region as a whole to see what might be some of the other implications of some of these Bible verses, by looking at the context of culture that they were surrounded by.
So divine council as in like divided into ranks almost, or?
Well, not necessarily. All it says is that there is a divine council. In the midst of the gods, he, the Almighty God, Yahweh, holds judgment.
Okay.
So
no, I'm talking about Atrahasis.
Oh, so yeah, so for Atrahasis,
like divided into ranks.
Yeah, there are different ranks. Enlil's kind of on top. The Anunnaki Enlil is also an Anunnaki, but all the Anunnaki are like the main class, and then the Igigi are the lower class gods.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So just different ways to think about this, and bear that in mind as we're talking about Mesopotamian mythology, that there is also kind of a divine council that's hinted at in the Bible. Whether the Bible is meaning to teach that, or whether it's more of just a poetic point, I'm not sure, but I just want to keep that in mind as we're rolling here. But yeah, there is a celestial hierarchy that's depicted across both mythologies, from biblical and Mesopotamian mythology, and then there is also a central ruling figure that's depicted. It's Enlil in Mesopotamian, and it's Yahweh in the Bible. So, all right, so let's actually roll into the Tale of Atrahasis here. So it starts off with the Igigi. So for 3,600 years, they're digging riverbeds and canals, doing all sorts of labor to maintain creation in the cosmos. And at a certain point, they just get irritated because they're doing all this backbreaking work for the Anunnaki. They're like, hey, we're working hard. They're just kind of sitting back and relaxing. We shouldn't be the ones that are having to do all of this stuff. So they basically go and they storm Enlil's palace. They storm his gate and they light all their tools on fire, and it's like a riot outside. And Enlil is awakened. He's furious. Well, initially he's scared. He's actually like terrified because he hears this rabble outside, and then he gets angry because he's like, how dare these Igigi, they're beneath us. How dare they rebel? And so he summons the Council of Anunnaki, and the Anunnaki all gather together. Enlil wants to destroy them, but Enki steps in. And let's see here. I have a comparative myth note. This does relate to Job chapter 1, where you see let's see, I'll just read it here. The angels are coming and presenting themselves before the Lord. And this, you do see some vague parallels here with like a divine council in a sense. So this is from the NIV, Job 1, 6 through 12. One day the angels came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came with them. The Lord said to Satan, "Where have you come from?" Satan answered the Lord, "From roaming throughout the earth, going back and forth on it." Then the Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job? There is no one on earth like him. He is blameless and upright, a man who fears God and shuns evil." I'll actually stop there. That's verse 8. But I think that encapsulates the point, is that there's a meeting or a convening of angels that happens and a discussing of the matters of earth. So, interesting comparative myth point to note. It does seem like the Bible also indicates there's some type of council here, and you have both of these myth accounts pointing in that direction. So it's indicative of a potentially common source for this idea. So back to the story here. So Enki steps in at Enlil's desire to wipe out humanity. And he says, like, hey, like, the Igigi are working hard for us. We really, like, we've asked too much of them. Like, we should step in. We should do something about it. And so I think it's he that comes up with the idea in this account for the creation of humanity. And so he and the goddess Nintu get together, and they decide to make humanity. And they make humanity from clay. It specifically says that in this account here. And then they also make it from the blood of a slain god. Now, there's no rebellion in this instance that's mentioned that they're killing this person that rebelled. Like, it could have been one of the Igigi that rebelled, but I don't think there's any mention of that in Atrahasis. But the god this time, there's a number of different translations. Iloela is the one that I saw in Stephanie Dolly's translation, so that's what I'm going with because that's the most verifiable one. But he's referred to as having intelligence. And then there's also a reference of like a spirit or ghost remaining after they slay him as like a sign of killing the god, that his spirit remains, which is interesting. So they have to kill a god to make humanity. So they kill a god, and then Nintu works on like creating a mud brick, and then Enki does all these cantations and stuff for purity on certain days over the cycle of like a month, as Nintu is working with this clay and this blood. And that's how humanity comes to be. And it's a mixing of the death of a god and clay. And then humanity is meant to take over the labor of the Igigi. To fill in that gap.
So to be servants.
Yeah. So again, servants to the god. So we see similar idea from the Enuma Elish.
Yeah.
Where humanity is made to be slaves. It's a lot more gentle in this one, but they're still, hey, you're taking over the work of the god, so we don't have to work. But let's see here. But yeah, so there's both divine essence and mortal limitations imposed on humanity here, where you have like the blood of a god, but it's imposed into, mortal form of clay. So it's an interesting annotation or side note. And then you compare this to Genesis, where God forms man from dust and, breathes into his nostrils the breath of life.
Well, and the purpose of being created too.
Right. So there's a different purpose. where, man is still meant to work, but it's more of a stewarding aspect in Genesis versus here it's more to relieve the gods of their labor to help manage everything versus Genesis, it's the crowning touch where, I'm creating all of this for man, and then man exists.
And then also just to have a relationship with God from the Bible, God.
Right.
Yeah.
But yeah, so you do kind of see these divine yet mortal essences tied together in Genesis as well, where man is created from dust, but he also has like the breath of life. And I can't remember from our analysis of Genesis, that might be the Ruach word for spirit. I can't remember. I know it was just too long ago. It's like 6 months ago we did that episode. So listeners can go back and listen to those early episodes and fact check me on that. But there is that aspect of...
We love a good fact check.
Yeah, you do. As you saw from the first 17 minutes of this episode, and just me fact checking myself. We get 80% of our facts wrong 90% of the time.
Heck yeah.
Not really. I feel like we're a bit more on base than that. That's probably more Billy Carson that gets his 80%
You
wrong
just
90%
had
of the
to
time.
sneak that in there.
Yes, I did. All right, so humanity's created, everything's going great, but then there's a problem. Humanity starts making, you'll recognize this one, too much noise.
They're making a ruckus.
And it disturbs Enlil. He can't rest. Same phraseology of what you hear Apsu saying in the beginning, where he's trying to rest and he can't rest because of the clamor of the younger gods. Well, now Enlil can't rest because of the clamor of humanity.
How the turntables.
Yeah. So 2 different stories, but you see that common theme there.
Is it just that they're noisy, or is it also the population numbers too?
It's the population. So I think it says in the original that like about 600 years or so had passed after the creation of humanity, and then people just became too numerous, and because they were so numerous, their noise was too much.
Okay.
So,
I guess that could have been inferred.
Yeah. So Genesis 6 talks about more how, the earth was corrupt in God's sight and filled with violence, and God saw everything was corrupt. And he decides he wants to end life on the earth, but he wants to save Noah and gives Noah instructions on how to build the ark. So just interesting comparison there where we see in the Epic of Atrahasis, it's more of a humanity's just being too loud versus Genesis, like it's corrupted, it's evil, it's depraved, it needs to be stopped. Kind of think like Nazi Germany kind of thing. We're like, okay, this evil of killing all of this innocence and all this twisting of what is meant to be good has to be put to an end. So Enlil in the Tale of Atrahasis, he attempts to control population by sending plagues, droughts, famine, but each time Enki steps in and intervenes, and he tells Atrahasis, and this is where we get the first mention of Atrahasis, how to save humanity. And basically what it is that there's just a number of different rituals that Enki gives Atrahasis to perform. Atrahasis does it, and then, the plague, whatever, famine, whatever it is, lifts after he performs this ritual. Like it appeases the gods. And so there's, where Enki's wisdom is playing in. So... It gets kind of gruesome in the actual Tale of Atrahasis. At the end of I think there's 3 or 4 or 5 of these plagues, droughts, famines that keep happening in succession. And there's lines that talk about cannibalism where a mother is eating her daughter, a daughter is eating her mother. And it talks about selling each other, for food and everything. It gets bad. And it's interesting to think about this in relation to Genesis and to think about how this might be an insight into a pre-flood world of what was happening in the times where Noah was alive before the flood actually occurred, that things were getting so bad and that God was withdrawing his favor from a biblical perspective so much from the earth that people were defaulting to cannibalism.
Should we put that as a trigger warning?
No, I think that's all right.
People eating people.
That's okay. That'll be all right.
Okay. It's cannibalism. It happens.
Not so much.
I'm just
no.
kidding.
Not so much. No.
I guess I shouldn't joke about cannibals.
No. She for the listeners just listening to this episode, she's making a joke off of what I said in the last episode. So you'll have to go listen to that episode for the context. She's not just saying that.
I'm not. I promise.
Let's see, that completely derailed me. I'm gonna need a second.
Lifting the plagues and everything.
No, yeah, but then there's also with like the accounts of Nephilim and giants that pop up, specifically when you look at like the accounts of the giants in Nevada from the Paiute tribe that are written about by Sarah Winnemucca. She talks about how these giants were cannibals and actually eating her people and everything in their traditions. And so you've got to wonder, hey, maybe in the mythology tradition, the Mesopotamians got it slightly wrong and they thought everyone was eating each other, but really it was just like the giants getting their taste for, human flesh. And that's like another thing too, you also have to think about what is the, when you see giants in mythology, they tend to want to eat people a lot of the time, Like in a lot,
I don't know.
In a lot of like stories and stuff, you see like in like even like Chronicles of Narnia, which C.S. Lewis, I think, based a lot of his concepts on like older mythology and everything, because he was very familiar with all of that. The giants in the silver chair want to eat the children, the human children that are there, and they're all friendly with them and everything, but they're planning to kill them and eat them for a feast that they have once a year. So
do you think that's more just symbolism of something else, like a metaphor, or do you think that's more of a literal sense?
What do you mean?
Just like all of the mythology. Like you said that's a really common theme.
A lot of giants are depicted as being cannibals. I can't name a whole bunch off the top of my head, but I've studied, I've read a lot of like the Grimm brothers and everything in different like stories over the years, and that definitely sticks out to me as like a common theme. I think like Jack and the Beanstalk's another one where the giant's like trying to eat him in that one. Maybe. I don't know. But you hear a lot of these stories, and so I think there's some truth to it, especially when you have like people like the Paiutes in Nevada talking about it, like a tribe of Native Americans in Nevada talking about it, and then you have like other traditions across continents. I don't know. It starts to make sense to me. I think that there might be some indications of that in the Book of Enoch as well. I could be wrong on that. It's been a while since I've touched the Book of Enoch, but
yeah.
Anyway, yeah. So that being said, that's two of the three tablets there. So we're gonna take a break now, and because our break system's been kind of off this episode, but that's all right. So
it happens.
It happens. We're going to take a break, and we will return in just a moment.
Don't go to Sheol. Back.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, flood enthusiasts. This is a series for you as we're talking about different flood myths in Mesopotamian mythology. That's kind of just our theme here right now, it seems, because we're going to be doing this, and then the next one will probably be the Eridu Genesis, which is another flood story. So, speaking of the flood, we're about to roll right into it here. Enlil is mad because he's been trying to get rid of humans, and Enki keeps sneaking behind his back and whispering secrets to Atrahasis, and Atrahasis keeps saving humanity. Even though their numbers are thinning, it's just not enough for Enlil. So he decides, you know what? We're going to do a flood, and Enki, you're going to do it. And Enki's like, how am I supposed to do this? Like, can I even do this? That's like the kind of stuff you do, like killing people on that level and scale. Like, you've got to do that, not me.
Because he's like a higher rank. Almost,
well, it's more like...
Does he just have more power?
Enlil's the storm god. So he's kind of more the one with the persona to kill people.
So is he telling this person to do this thing, like just...
He's telling Enki to do it because Enki is the god of water, but Enki is like kind of like, at least in the reading that I did of Atrahasis, he's kind of taken aback. He's like, do I even have this power? Do I even have... Like, where am I going to get all this water? Like, how do I have the ability to do this? Yeah. So they ultimately decide to swear Enki to secrecy. and forbid him from warning the humans about the coming doom. So Enki thinks about it and he's like, how do I get around this? There has to be a way.
A loophole.
So he finds a loophole, the ultimate loophole god. He goes down and
I love this part.
he speaks to Atrahasis, but he doesn't speak to him directly. He speaks to the reed wall of his house. And he's like, hey, you need to reed wall. You need to tear down your house. You need to build an ark and you need to make its top nice and like protected because there's a giant flood coming. You need abandoned possessions. You need to gather everything together and you need to get out of here.
If he wasn't a god, he would be a good lawyer.
Yeah. You said that last time too.
I know.
But yeah.
I keep going back to it, but
yeah. So from my reading, I don't have the book in here with me, darn it. But I don't think there was any actual instructions for like dimensions or anything of the ark given in the Atrahasis epic. It's just more, I think the phraseology that's used was literally make the roof like the Apsu, like the deep waters, like impenetrable by light. So making it really strong and sturdy on top. Versus like what you see in the Bible where God gives Noah instructions to make an ark out of gopher wood, and then he gives them the dimensions of 300 cubits by 50 cubits and then height of 30 cubits. And then making a roof for the ark. So there we also have roof being mentioned in comparison to the Tale of Atrahasis, which is not really exactly something that's super common across what's it called? Boat making, I guess. Like at least in ancient times, like you wouldn't really think to put a roof on something, but because like generally it'd be a lot more open boats. And we're like, yeah, you might have an under deck. I don't know if the top deck of a boat would quantify as like a roof. It would just be the top deck. So there's emphasis of a roof being put on it here, which I think is interesting. And then the Bible specifically says make a roof and then different decks for it. So any thoughts on that?
No, I was just trying to Google quick if he did say like specific dimensions or any like other details, but I couldn't find anything like very quickly.
Yeah, there's like some general guidance given, but I don't think it says like, hey, make it this length by this length or anything like that. At least as far as I'm aware. I don't remember that in my readings.
Let me try.
There are different dimensions and guidances given, like the Epic of Gilgamesh gives like the length and width and harmony is what is said, and that refers to like a cube shape. And then there is also a tablet for one of the Akkadian flood stories, I think, or another flood myth that I don't know if we even have the account for or not, that has a description. It looks like kind of like a half dome shape with a little house on top. We saw that when we were at the Ark encounter.
Yeah.
So there are different descriptions of an Ark given at certain points, but I don't think Atrahasis goes super in depth on that like the Bible does.
So what I'm finding is he didn't give specific instructions size-wise, but he's saying about circular in shape, sturdy enough to survive a flood. Yeah. But then I'm seeing something else saying, oh, never mind. That's Epic of Gilgamesh. I'm getting mixed up now.
No worries.
Never mind.
But, yeah, so minimal details, basically.
Yes.
So the flood happens. In this account, it's, I believe, 7 days and 7 nights. And then Atrahasis survives because of Enki's instructions. And Enlil comes down and sees that Atrahasis survived, and immediately he knows it's like it was Enki. He's like, you had something to do with this, didn't you? Mm-hmm. They were all supposed to be wiped out. How did they know it was coming? And
you sly dog.
And Enki's like, hey, like I had to do it, kind of a thing. And all the other gods were like watching the destruction, and they were like horrified by the whole flood that was occurring. And so they kind of stand up for Enki at this point, and they're like, hey, he did a good thing. He did the right thing, saving humanity. Like, you need to back off, basically. And that is more or less how the tale ends. They decide to impose different measures for controlling the population of humanity. So infertility, stillbirth of children, things like that. Other measures to make sure that humanity doesn't get out of control again, population-wise. But this is interesting because you actually see God imposes a limitation on human life, that man's years shall be 120 after the flood. And then gradually after that, you see that the lifespan starts dropping down to, anywhere from like 60 to 120 years. There's I don't think there's anyone recorded that's lived past 120, at least that we're aware of in recent times. So
I think the oldest that I've seen, like online or anything, is like 110, 111.
Right. So, but this is the thing, is you see these common themes of imposing a limitation on life, but they're two so drastically different things of mortality, infertility, population control in that aspect. But then you also have population control in a very different way outlined in Genesis, where they're vaguely similar, but they're different enough that it's really hard to say that these are copies of one or the other. To me, it sounds more like there was a common story that these both grabbed aspects of, and they're just retelling those aspects in different ways and with different symbology or more historical perspective. Yeah,
because in Genesis we hear pain in childbirth. That's another thing too that was mentioned.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's a different way of saying the limitations or punishment, if you will.
Well, that's in Genesis, the pains in childbirth. But that's another one as well. And so you see where they're kind of getting those details from the Bible just in a different order as well. And you see that in the Epic of Gilgamesh, where the snake comes along and steals the seaweed, that has the gift of eternal life. And a serpent steals the gift of eternal life that is in Gilgamesh's grasp. But it's after the flood, not before the flood like it is in Genesis. And you just have this, it's just really interesting to me where you have these common themes. But quick side note here, I want to talk about floods because there's flood mythology literally all over the world. Norse has it. There's a lot in South American traditions. You have a lot of Mesopotamian ones are going through all of these now. You have the biblical ones. I think the Aborigines in Australia also have one. You have Greek. There are flood legends all over the world. They span continents. And I did something on social media talking about this, how they span across continents. And someone commented it's more likely they were borrowing each other's stories. And it's how do you borrow a story across continents though how? You just can't do that. That speaks to something deeper, something rooted in humanity's origin, at the very least, if they're all borrowing from each other, which would more likely speak to a true event.
Mm-hmm.
But
if they are borrowing, it would have to be over a very significant amount of time.
Yeah, and then
travelers.
Yeah, but then you have isolated populations.
Yes.
So
that too.
Yeah, it becomes a big problem. And then you could also argue, oh, well, everyone had floods. Okay, sure, but did everyone have global floods? Because oh shoot,
if it's global, then yeah. Because then that's everyone.
Well, yeah, that's true. Actually, that's a good one. Did everyone have floods? Well, yeah, if it's global.
If it's global.
But a lot of people would argue that local floods are pretty common too across the world.
Yeah,
and that's a fair argument. But then you also have to delineate how a lot of these accounts are addressing global floods, like the Bible with Mount Ararat. And then the Epic of Gilgamesh, I forget what mountain range, but there's another mountain range it references, a similar region that the ark comes to rest on. It's just interesting to me because they're not, in these accounts at least, they're not talking about a local flood. They're talking about a global flood. Even with the Timaeus and Critias, I always go back to that. Plato is literally telling the fall of Atlantis by a major local flood that destroys Atlantis and makes it sink into the sea. But he still references the Great Deluge singular as a singular massive event in contrast to this massive local flood or tsunami.
I know I've also said this before, but the language of the,
yes,
implying that it's not just a flood, but what comes to mind when you say the flood. It's obviously going to be the biggest one.
Right.
The most catastrophic one.
Exactly. Whatever stands out in people's minds the most.
Yeah.
So I'm going to shift gears here. Let's talk a little bit more about this Divine Counsel, because there's one more verse I want to hit on as we wrap up the Tale of Atrahasis. 1 Kings 22:19-23. So this is the deliberation of angels and God deciding King Ahab's fate. He's a king that had turned away from God. And Micah said, "Therefore, hear the word of the Lord. I saw the Lord sitting on his throne and all the hosts of heaven standing beside him on his right hand and on his left. And the Lord said, who will entice Ahab that he may go up and fall at Ramoth Gilead? And one said one thing and one said another. Then the Spirit came forward and stood before the Lord, saying, I will entice him. And the Lord said to him, by what means? And he said, I will go out and I will be a lying spirit in the mouth of all of his prophets. And he said, you are to entice him and you shall succeed. Go out and do so. Now, therefore, behold, the Lord has put a lying spirit in the mouth of all of these your prophets. The Lord has declared disaster for you." And this is a prophet literally telling Ahab this, and then he goes out and does it anyway, and I think he dies. So, but it's interesting here because you see, again, deliberation and implying some type of counsel, where God is the head and he is deliberating with this counsel on what's going to happen and how the end is going to be achieved. It's interesting just to think about all of this in contrast to Enlil deliberating with a council as well, and trying to decide what to do and how to impact the fate of humanity in a sense. And it just seems like these are talking about similar things, that they're referring to similar things that just are lost to humanity a little bit because of our finite, cosmic, grounded earthly nature, that there's something greater in the heavens that occurs that we just are at a blank for. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. I just wanted to bring that up kind of with talking about this divine counsel that we've been hitting. We'll do a thematic wrap up here. There's a lot of, yes, I mean, you see a lot of labor in Atrahasis, the rebellion, and then, yeah.
I also wanted to mention, in Genesis, is it after the flood, or just that, I'm trying to think of what it is. The many different languages.
That's the Tower of Babel, Genesis 11. It's a couple chapters after.
Okay. Because I know that was, I don't want to call that a punishment, but it kind of is.
So that's another interesting one, because Deuteronomy actually addresses that, and I have that verse in here. Deuteronomy 32:8-9. When the Most High gave to the nations their inheritance, when he divided mankind, he fixed the borders of the peoples according to the number of the sons of God. So it's kind of basically saying that there's a council member that represents each nation, in a sense, in the divine throne room. And you kind of see this idea mirrored with different nations kind of have their god, in a sense, at least in ancient times, where again, it depended on the region you're talking about in Mesopotamia, the time period you're talking about, but it could be Marduk, it could be, Enlil or Enki. You have these different divine figures that were the heads of certain cities. And there was a lot more of city-states back then, like Athens. It's guarded by Athena, the goddess Athena. And then also in Egypt, they have their mirroring of I forget what it's called, but again, talked about in the Atlantis, the Critias and Timaeus discussions. But that's just something else to keep in mind as well, is where there does seem to be more of this, while the Bible preaches monotheism, there does also seem to be other lowercase g gods that are referenced numerous times, and that often seems to get missed in modern Christian understanding, where people just hear, Christian's a monotheistic religion, which is true, but there's a lot more to it the more you start digging down. When you have the 10 plagues happen with Moses in Egypt, the Egyptian priests are actually able to copy some of what Moses does, indicating that there were some deities giving these priests power to be like when Moses casts his rod down and it turns into a snake. The Egyptian priests also do that, and theirs also turn into a snake. And then Moses's snake eats the other snakes. So you have this mirroring of power that the Egyptian priests seem to have, which I think is interesting. I think it adds a whole new dimension to not just like looking at Christianity, but also looking at Christianity in relation to like Mesopotamian mythology, because this is going to be more similar to Christianity in region at the very least, where I'm not saying one copied the other, but you're going to see more similar themes, maybe based on more similar truths. So all that being said, which is my catchphrase apparently for when it's time to take a break, because that's what I say every single time as I'm listening back. So I'll try to fix that.
We're going to take a break.
Yes.
How's that?
There we go. We're just going to stop right now.
Hi, we're back.
Welcome back. Got to keep it fresh here on Musings on Mysteries in the Mythical Matrix. So not too much else to hit here, and then we'll close out. So, you do see a monotheistic God presiding over spiritual beings mentioned in the Bible numerous times. There's not really much emphasis put on these other beings in the Bible and from a biblical perspective, but in the Epic of Atrahasis and other Mesopotamian traditions, you see a polytheistic council that everyone's put a little bit more on a level playing field, in a sense, which is it's just a different way to look at it. That they deified some of maybe the minor deities in the Divine Council of Yahweh, if you want to come at it from more of a biblical perspective. So a good question to ask is, how do these ancient ideas of divine councils and human origins shape modern interpretations of leadership, morality, and spirituality?
I didn't realize you were asking me specifically. You're just staring at me.
It's more for the audience in general. But you're the only other person.
Well, they're not going to answer.
There's only one other person in the room with me. So, all right, I'll read it again. How do these ancient ideas of divine councils and human origins shape modern interpretations of leadership, morality, and spirituality? It's a pretty deep question, I know.
I guess the different views of humanity itself. So, like with Atrahasis or Hysis, however you want to pronounce it, you know what I mean.
Either way, it's fine. I mean, we're talking about ancient languages here. It's,
yes.
Say it one way or another, whatever works best.
But humanity in that regard is seen as expendable.
Yeah, from this, early...
And transactional, I should say.
Yeah, from this different Babylonian perspective here, you see it's still very transactional, and it's not as strict as the Enuma Elish is in terms of forcibly bringing order, but there still is that vague kind of principle.
Yeah.
Where humanity is a tool to be used versus humanity is treasured and something to have a relationship with from the Bible.
Yeah. Well, and then with the Bible, humanity is seen as a final touch, pinnacle of creation, not, just an afterthought, hey, or we're just going to do this to solve a problem. Yeah.
Or something just be hey, we've got to take the load off the Igigi. How do we do that? Oh, humanity. And we'll have to kill a god to do so. So there's death. That's just a natural part of the world.
It happens.
Before humanity even exists here in the Epic of Atrahasis, versus in Genesis, death doesn't happen until after man exists and makes a mistake. And that's when death enters the world.
Hopefully I answered that question okay.
No, I mean, it's a very deep question.
Yes. With leadership, too, it's in the Atrahasis, it's just take. Within the Bible, it's more give, and then,
Well, as we were talking about, Enki is a little bit more benevolent, where he's trying to help humanity out because of, the wisdom that he has.
I mean, everybody else other than Enki.
Right. Yeah. This ties into episode 1 that we talked about, where worldview is a huge role in everything. And so you got to think about what perspective you're approaching, because how you approach these questions of life, and this is why, in part, why mythology matters, how you approach these questions of life and where humanity comes from and, what our purpose is here is going to determine how you live the rest of your life in some capacity or another.
I mean, I guess it could be implied that because there's a hierarchy in Atrahasis, there's also limitations per god. Like how you said the Enki was what, the water?
Water and wisdom.
Yeah, water and wisdom, and then the other person was like the storm.
Yeah, Enlil's more of like the storm god.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of other gods in the pantheon as well. I'm just, again, hitting the highlights.
But like with Genesis, I should just say Bible, but the God in the Bible, there's just one God, no, I don't want to say hierarchy, but there is the Trinity, but he's more omnipotent, omniscient, so that sort of thing.
Yeah, I'm going to be interested. Well, at some point, we're going to have to come back and do a study on Revelation. Not to get Bill Rudge to do, because he's a end times scholar.
That'll be fun.
He studies the end times. To get him back to do Revelation at some point, I think, because there's one mention of a whole bunch of elders in heaven that are like seated around God's throne. And so I wonder how much of that is playing into this divine counsel aspect and looking at Revelation and what Revelation says in relation to these ideas we're talking about from Mesopotamian mythology. But anyway, idea for a show down the road. But yeah, and then as well, this really plays into episode, I think it was 6, the Euthyphro dilemma, where you have to ask yourself, is something good because the gods will it, or do the gods will something because it's good? Is there like
the chicken and the egg?
Yeah, what comes first? Does goodness come first? Is there something greater than the gods, or are the gods greater than good, and whatever the gods say is good goes? And you get around that with like the biblical perspective, because it's both. Because God is good and good is God. The natures are intertwined together.
And like, wasn't there like a specific verse saying he said it was good? Mm-hmm. And,
yeah,
that sort of thing.
So
I definitely butchered how I wanted to word that, but you know what I mean.
Yeah. When God's talking about creation, he addresses it as being good.
Yes.
So if you want to hear more thoughts on that, I think it's episode 6 that I dive into that a bit more. Last big thing I want to hit, because I said I would address this, and it's at the very end of my notes. I didn't realize it. So why all the different names for the Noah figure across Mesopotamian mythology?
Is this a question for
No,
me?
This is a rhetorical question. This is not a question I'm going to answer. You're good. So there's a number of different names. There's 3 different key ones. Ziuzudra comes from the Eridu Genesis. He is Sumerian. Atrahasis comes from Babylonian. And then Utnapishtim comes from the Epic of Gilgamesh, and that's later Babylonian. So these, I think I might have even hit on this in the last episode. This is sounding a little familiar, but I'll go a little more in depth here. So Ziuzudra can mean a number of things. It can mean he who laid down life and righteousness, or he who lived in ancient days. Atrahasis refers to exceedingly wise, and that really plays into his role on leaning into Enki or Ea to help give him wisdom for him to be able to save humanity. He's a bringer of wisdom to be able to give humanity the resources they need to survive. And then you have Utnapishtim, and that name plays heavily into the themes of the Epic of Gilgamesh, of he who found life, eternal life, basically, which is Gilgamesh's whole quest. So why all the different names? 1, you have different regions and different time periods. And then 2, you also have different traits, where names were given for traits. Especially back then. I think I've mentioned it before, but like Abraham means father of many. So God changed Abram's name to Abraham to indicate that he was going to have many children and going to be the father of a whole nation one day. And so that's the mentality of this culture, because Abraham actually comes from Mesopotamia. He comes from the city of Ur, which is in the Mesopotamian Fertile Crescent region initially. That's where God calls him out of. So you have this mentality of names being huge significance. So the names change, but it's just to describe different attributes of the same person for the story. So it's Utnapishtim, he who found life, for the Epic of Gilgamesh, because Gilgamesh is seeking eternal life. It's Atrahasis in the Tale of Atrahasis, because it's he who is exceedingly wise, he who is using the wisdom of Enki or Ea. And then Ziazidra, as we'll get to in the Eridu Genesis, he who laid down life and righteousness, or he who lived in ancient days.
I have this one, life of long days, but that kind of means the same thing.
Yeah.
You also said in passing culture. So with that, the names are obviously going to be different based on culture, just to fit their traditions and their language.
Right.
So the names are going to be different anyways to fit that.
Yes, exactly. So it's important to keep in mind, but I want to clarify where that's coming from for the listener so you're aware. All the same person. I'll try to keep it right with each epic or tale that we're telling to keep the right Noah name figure with that, but
and if we get it wrong, we're going to fact check it anyways.
Yeah.
So.
Sometimes I mean to say one thing and I say something different. I've heard that sometimes in some of the episodes. So if something I say doesn't quite make sense, it just might be brain fart. It happens.
Send us an email.
At m.quad.musings@gmail.com. Just don't send your logical fallacies. It's a dangerous road. We'll leave you anonymous, but we'll poke some fun at you.
You will supply us with entertainment if you do that. So maybe you should.
Disagreement is welcome, but just make sure it's logically based. Do you have anything else before we start running through wrap-ups here?
I'm
hearing a long hesitation, so we're going to go with no.
I'm trying to look through all the stuff that I had pulled up, and it's like we really hit all of it.
Yeah. So I'm going to do a little bit of housekeeping here. Oh, you have something?
Did you talk about the difference between oral and written traditions?
I have not talked about that. No. You want to talk about that?
Not really.
Okay.
I'm just...
Okay.
I'm just bringing that up because relating that to the name thing too, that would affect it. Whether it was oral, because have you ever played the telephone game?
Yeah, of course. Everyone has. Well, maybe not everyone.
You know what they say about assuming.
Don't do it. Don't do it.
There's probably somebody listening. What's the telephone game?
You just made fun of one of our listeners. How could you do that?
I apologize.
You better.
But you better play the telephone game because apparently everyone has. Anyways.
Told you a million times to never exaggerate.
Anyways. The telephone game. So if basically it's you say a phrase and you go around in a line. Yeah.
Yeah, like you whisper one person to the next
and
down the line.
And at the end, what's like somebody says out loud what the phrase is. And like almost every single time it's something completely different. So you have to think about that too, like oral traditions, passed down between generations over time. Stuff is going to change.
Yes, there's embellishment, but
if you take it from the point of copying, which
this is a very loaded topic.
It is. I'm sorry.
It's fine. We'll hit it a little bit. I think that you're right in the sense that there is going to be embellishment and changing of the stories over time, but there are also other people groups that are very strict on oral traditions to not even change one single letter of what's said in memorizing scripts and passing it down to the next generation because they rely on that more than written, because you can lose the ability to read and write and you can lose the ability of documentation, which Plato, again, it all goes back to Critias and Timaeus. He says these things happened with the ancient Greeks. Well, the Egyptian priests say it happened.
Didn't that happen with the Bible too? Like written down over time and stuff got changed, or was that something else that we talked about?
I'm not aware of that happening with the Bible. Some people might claim that, but there's not really any, like, we have very high documentation that the Bible, at least as far back as we're able to reasonably tell historically, has not been altered in
maybe
really
it was
any way.
Something else.
So
I don't know. I'm definitely
So it depends what
Yeah.
we're talking about here, because you're going to lose facts, and it's going to get embedded in myth if you're not very strict on the oral traditions. So sometimes writing can be better, sometimes oral tradition can be better. It kind of just depends on the circumstances. So I wouldn't dismiss oral tradition, but I'd be curious to learn about the methodology of how that's preserved. Are they strict on like saying the same things, from father to son and then to the next person, the next person? Do they have the exact same script, or is it just more of an embellished storytelling? It's like a fish story. Every time you talk about how you caught a fish, it gets a little bit bigger each time when you're telling it. And so, a 6-inch fish that you caught ends up being a 6-foot fish by the time you've told it like 10 times.
Well, and that's why I mentioned the telephone game, because that's such a good example of, and that's not even over time. That's literally within like a 5-minute game.
Because people don't hear something quite right.
Yeah. Yeah. Coming at it from a psychology point too, which is always fun. Sometimes you don't like what you hear, so you choose not to hear it. It's like the selective hearing.
There's also that psychology thing where what you expect to hear is what you're going to hear if it's too jarbled, where it's like that one jarbled phrase that's repeated, and then there's all these other written phrases up, and whichever one you're reading is what you hear. But it's all the same audio you hear playing over and over again. I don't remember what that's called, but that's another factor that would play into all of this. And then, as well, you have to think about how language changes over time.
Yes,
so
dialects and...
A great way to think about this is in terms of King James. Go read the King James Bible if you're not familiar with it. Have fun. It's gonna be a lot of these and thous, and you're gonna get very frustrated very fast. I actually have one that relates to the Bible. It's talked about in Numbers 30, where it talks about vows. The original Hebrew word there that's used is neder or nederim. And what it's talking about is it's translated as vow. And I think that's a mistranslation in our modern Bibles. What I think, if you really look at the context of how that is used across the narrative version of the Bible, or across other cultures. And there's actually a book from a scholar on this as well that I've read that talks about how it's not so much a vow. Because a vow is just like, can be a statement. It's not a vow so much as it is making like a deal with God or a bet with God that if you do X, I do Y. Like that
a deal like a covenant?
Covenant would be like blood. So this is just a verbal agreement that if you do X, I do Y.
Okay.
So you see this with the birth of Samuel, the priest, where his mom wants to have a child and she can't. And so she prays and says to God that if you give me a child, once he's of a certain age, I'll give him back to you and let him serve you at the temple, kind of thing. And then one of the other priests walks in and says that God will grant her, what she's requested. And so she fulfills her vow. So it's not that she's just making a statement. It's that she's saying, if you do X, I'll do Y. It's a transactional thing. And you see this theme consistent through all different narrative uses of neder within the Bible. And so this is an issue of where language changes and people don't understand this, of where you just see that word of vow and it's like, oh, well, we might think of that as like a politician standing on a stage and saying, I vow to do X or Y, but that's just them making a statement most times versus like a conditional agreement where, you do X, I do Y. It's things like this with culture and language change over time a lot. And it's important to consider this. And, yes, we're looking at all this Mesopotamian mythology, but there is, so much deeper that we could dive, if we were, cuneiform scholars, which I'm not, sadly. We retell the stories and we talk about it as in-depth as we can, but, there's only so much we can do without the original language and the context of the original language, which is very difficult, if not impossible to do. But we do our best here on Musings on Mysteries in the Mythical Matrix. That was a long rant.
We try. I didn't realize that I kind of opened Pandora's box on that one, but
yeah, it's okay. It happens.
But it was a good topic. It was a good point.
Pandora's box gets opened. It happens. It happens. Do you have anything else? Otherwise, I'm going to run through closeouts and housekeeping.
I am A-okay.
Sweet. All right, so hit the affiliate link if you're in. I'll put that for the Stephanie Dawley's translation of Mesopotamian mythology. Atrahasis is the first one. When you open it up, it's only like 30 pages. It's actually a great read. That was probably my favorite read out of all of the Mesopotamian mythology accounts because it's so fun. It flows. There's so much you can glean out of it. So we've summarized it here for you, but if you really want to dive in depth and fact check us, which I encourage you to do. Don't take my word for it. Definitely don't take Billy Carson's word for it. Go read these accounts yourself. You can get the vast majority of Mesopotamian mythology accounts all condensed into that one book. Our affiliate link for that will be in the show notes. I'm not sure what shows are going to look like for the next month because I have several different guests and or other tangential topics that might be popping up. I'm not going to say what they all are because I don't want to get listeners' hopes up for something in particular. We will be continuing our Mesopotamian mythology study. My plan next is to hit the Eridu Genesis and the Sumerian Kings list in one episode and to talk about that. And that might play a little bit more into Nibiru. I'm not sure. But we'll see. But that's my plan for the next Mesopotamian mythology episode. It might be another month even before we get to that because I just have a lot of guests and a lot of other show opportunities that seem like they're all popping up at once. So I don't know what shows are going to look like. We might be hitting the Bible for a little bit again. We might be hitting more fringe UFO, UAP topics for a little bit. We might be hitting quantum physics even for a little bit. I'm not sure where everything's going to go. So just for you as a listener to be warned, we will be continuing Mesopotamian mythology. Stick with us, but the next 2 to 5 episodes might be tangential. So forewarned.
It's nice to have a break every now and then from...
It also gives me more time to prep too, which I really do need. So, because I don't have to do as much prep when we have a guest on the show, or we, go on a rabbit hole tangent that I don't have to do as much research as I do for all of these to make sure I'm getting all my facts right.
Right.
So I don't have to come back for 17 minutes and do fact check on myself. Be like, oh yeah, I got this wrong. Anyway.
Also, the episodes that I'm going to be kind of leading to, I don't know when those are going to happen.
Yeah,
they're going to happen
because you have a whole bunch of psychology episodes that you're going to do for us as well, talking about neuroscience and all of that. Yeah,
the neurospicy.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that'll also be something that's happening. So just so you as a listener are aware, we'll be following. We won't be sticking strictly necessarily to Mesopotamian mythology because it's probably I guess like maybe 3 episodes I can probably do on Mesopotamian mythology still. So stick around if you like the Mesopotamian mythology and you don't like the other content, but if you're getting bored of Mesopotamian mythology, hey, you're going to get a break. So it's a win-win. Plug the affiliate link, buy me a cup of coffee link will also be in the show notes. The user handle for that is m.quad.musings, as it is for everything that I have control over for our social media platforms. I guess I'll just run through the rest of the closeouts here. You can find us on Instagram, TikTok, m.quad.musings, Facebook, Musings and Mysteries of Mythical Matrix. Check out the YouTube channel. You want to get a more easy to digest version of a lot of these myths that we're talking about. The YouTube channel is going to be your best friend. I take these and I retell these stories in very short form with visuals from AI and other sources to make it very engaging and interesting for you as the listener. And I'm constantly working on refining that skill set and getting better. So YouTube channel is going to be a huge one. Again, m.quad.musings. It's growing a lot. So if you check it out, definitely give us some support, like, subscribe, comment. The more interaction we get on the YouTube channel, the more the YouTube channel algorithms push out the content to other potential viewers and listeners that might be interested. And then you help us grow, you help us get bigger. So, yeah, trying to think. I don't think there's any other closeouts. Oh, please send us your thoughts. We really want to hear from you. If you have confessions, concessions, contentions, snide remarks, whatever you like about the show, whatever you don't like about the show, email it to us at m.quad.musings@gmail.com. Specifically, email us your thoughts on the question that I asked that I cannot find in my notes right now. I was trying to read it real quick and be fancy, but... Oh, there we go. How do these ancient ideas of divine councils and human origins shape modern interpretations of leadership, morality, and spirituality? So email us your thoughts on that at m.quad.musings@gmail.com. Really want to hear from the listeners more, so I'm not forced to read comments from occasional trolls on social media.
You gotta love a good troll, though.
Gotta love a good troll. Absolutely. It's a good time. So, whether you've been listening on the earth, above the earth, or below the earth,
in Sheol,
we thank you for tuning in and quantumly transcending time to interact with us as we study Mesopotamian mythology. And although I'm not sure where exactly we're going with the next episode, I look forward to seeing you there. See you next time.